Hey everyone, welcome back to the 30-day writing challenge. You are in week 4, so you're in the final stretch. Depending on when you're watching this, you may have a few days left, you may be completely done. So either congratulations or you can get there, you're so close. But this week, I'm going to kind of pivot from talking about how to build up your story, because I think you guys have seen a bunch of tools, you've seen a lot of writing prompts. You can work from there. You can work from the NaNoWriMo high school workbook to kind of help you with that stuff. This week, I'm going to talk about what comes afterwards and focus on once you've finished your story, what you would do in terms of editing, maybe getting feedback, submitting that piece, different things like that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so as you approach the end of the month, whether you've already made it to the end of your 30 days or if you've still got a few days left, this is what you want to think about when you're getting there. So did you make your word count goal? If you did, awesome. If not, that's totally okay as long as you still made progress. You may have found that your month was busier than you expected it to be. You had more homework, you had more problems with your online school. Any of those things that popped up, that's totally fine. It's your word count, it's fine for it to be flexible as long as you're still working towards it. So as long as you got some stuff written and you made some progress on your story, you still did great. Okay. If you're at the end, or even if you're approaching the end still, how far along did you get in the story? So maybe you completely finished. Maybe you're still halfway there at 50,000 words and you're not even done. And that's okay. You may have a lot to say. You may have a really intriguing story. But you want to think about where you're at in terms of how you're building that tension. And if you're getting close to the end, how you wrap that up in a satisfying way. The question that comes next is, what now? And so I have up here, if you're interested in looking, if you've been working along with the NaNoWriMo novel workbook, on page 72 is when they kind of start talking about the what's next. And so they'll give you some information on workshopping with friends or at school or whoever you're working with, and also thoughts about editing and potentially submitting that piece. And I'm going to go into some similar things, but I'm going to talk more about publishing options as well, whereas they'll simply focus on submitting to, literary magazines for teens or, things like that. So smaller pieces, but that's okay. So congrats on taking a chance on your story idea. Sometimes that's a painfully hard first step to just get it started and get going with it. The next part is, whether you've completed your story or not. If you haven't, that's okay. Keep working on it until it feels like your story arc is complete, or you feel like you've got all the stuff that you need. And if you have finished your story, then take a break. Pat yourself on the back, have a piece of cake, whatever you want to do to celebrate. But then try to stay away from your story for at least a week. Some writers prefer to go longer. Some, suggest going a month without looking at your story. But giving yourself some space will allow you to kind of get your head out of that space. And then when you come back to look at the story, to do your edits or to do get some feedback from someone, you can look at it a little more objectively and decide, I really like this before, but it doesn't work. Or I thought this was complete, but I'm realizing there's a plot hole here. So different things like that you might not notice when you're still in the thick of the, planning process of the story. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to touch on is editing. And I'm just going to go basics for now, but what you want to think about when you're doing first revisions is the simple stuff. Filling in the holes that you find, or kind of, just fixing those little things that pop out to you now that you've had a second to step back from your story and take a breath. Okay. So you're going to look at it from your reader's perspective. And the first thing to look at are you noticing any areas that could use more scenes? And that could be either because maybe your pacing was a little off. Maybe you wrote things really quickly and you want to get more description in there. You want to build more tension with dialogue, or like draw that tension out a little bit by just extending those scenes a little bit longer. Or maybe there was a plot hole, like it mentions here. Maybe there is something that you didn't even notice that you forgot. And now that you've seen the end of your story, you're like, oh, I definitely need to make a change there. So you may need to add stuff in. You may also see that you have scenes that are completely unnecessary. And that usually comes when they don't do anything to advance the story in any way, and they don't reveal something important about your character. Those are two big reasons why you might decide to pull a whole scene, or maybe just a few paragraphs or a few sentences that just don't really need to be there anymore. If you did some of the exercises with overloading with description to try and boost your word count, now might be the time to go back and see, do I need all of those descriptions? Would one or two work better? And make those changes. You also want to look at your dialogue. And in this case, you might want to read it out loud so you can hear how it sounds to your reader. And if you're reading it and it makes you cringe, chances are that's not good. So you may want to change it, unless the point of that particular conversation was to make one of your characters uncomfortable. And then in that point, it may be cringy and it may be perfectly fine. So you have to look at what works for your story. You want to look at any sentences that sound strange, or maybe there's so much in them, they're so long, that by the time you get to the end of the sentence, you're kind of confused about where it started. Maybe it's hard to understand, you don't really know what it means. If you see any of those sentences, you definitely want to fix them. Because if you're having trouble understanding it, chances are your readers will have trouble understanding it because they didn't write the story. So you want to look for those. And if you notice any typos or repetitive words like extra thes, or random rogue punctuation that jumps out at you, go ahead and fix those too. Those are a little bit less important at this first stage, simply because right now you want to look at the big picture. But if you notice them, don't worry, it's totally fine to change them. Okay. Once you've taken a chance to kind of read through your own story, that's when you may want to go ahead and share it, get some feedback, get some writing critique from other people, just to see how your story reads and how it's received by others. So I'm going to start with who should give you feedback, because that can be hard to decide if you don't have a ton of friends who are writers. But you want to find someone who is supportive of your writing, is supportive of your goal of the story, but also someone who's going to be honest with you on what needs work. So if someone's not supportive of you in your writing, then chances are they're not going to have much useful to say about your story. So you want to pick someone you trust, maybe a friend or a family member, a trusted adult maybe at school who encourages your writing. And you want them to give you feedback that can help you, not necessarily fix. In some cases, yes, fix, but in other cases, help you to think about how you can expand or build on your story to make it stronger. You have the option of joining or maybe even creating a writer's group if one doesn't exist. Typically in groups like these, you will be expected to give critique on other people's work if you want feedback on your own. So it's kind of a give and take system. So you want to think about that if you're ready to give someone else feedback as well. You can hire a professional editor to look at your story. And if you plan definitely to publish, that is something that will probably take place. But if you're still just in the stages where you don't know if you want to publish, or you just kind of want to fix your story, or you're just enjoying that experience, definitely draw on your free options first, because professional editors can be expensive. So you don't want to go through that process unless you know that you are committed to finding someone to publish your story. And real quick, since I only talked about editing for about one slide earlier, I'll jump in here. When you go to work with a professional editor, there are different levels of editing that are done. So they can look at your big picture of the story. They can read through the whole thing and give you feedback on issues they noticed with plot holes, things that didn't make sense, things that aren't working, maybe characters that don't feel real. They don't feel like they're holding up their end of the story or their burden in the story. They can also look at line edits, kind of doing making changes to the wording of sentences rather than the big picture story. There's also, really specific like grammar, punctuation edits. Those are probably the last ones you want to do. Is have someone looking at your periods and your commas and things like that. Because if you have lots of big structural changes to your story to make, it doesn't do any good for someone to pay someone to edit the commas and periods, because that will likely change. So just things to think about if you're in the market for a professional editor. There are also websites that offer critique groups or community critique if you post your story. If you write fan fiction, you probably are part of a community of some type that does something a little similar. If you use websites like Wattpad, you may know about that. My suggestion is to always research first before you post your writing, especially if it's something that you think you want to get published someday. If it's a toss-away story, it may not matter, but if it's something that you're really proud of, you want to know who has access to it and what they're doing with it, because it's your intellectual property. And so anyone you share that with should be reputable and they should be responsible, and you want to be able to retain your rights to your own work. Starting on this slide and the next two after it, this is actually from a document that I've put together, and so I will link to that in the YouTube video and at the bottom of the slide so that you can pull that up as a document online and download it if you want to keep that for any writing groups that you may decide to be a part of or create. But when you decide to submit a piece for feedback, it's always helpful to tell your readers what you want help with. They may notice things that you didn't think about, and that's fine. But if there's something specific you want them to focus on, if you don't tell them, they may not. And so, it's really helpful if you want that specific feedback. Like, how did my character come across? If you want to know that, you need to let them know that they should be focusing on that and giving you feedback. Same thing for any points that don't feel right to you. If you're not sure about them, let them know that and get their feedback. Did they like it? Did they not like it? What felt weird to them about it or didn't? And if you have a really long story, like if you hit your 50,000 word, if that was your goal and you hit that, chances are your writing group's not going to have time to read the whole thing. So you're going to want to pick an excerpt, and you may do that several times and do different excerpts, but you want to pick a smaller piece of your larger story for them to read through. And if you're going to do that, you want to give them background on what's happening before that scene and after that scene, so they know how it fits in the story in context. And you can do that in about 2 to 3 sentences. This slide and the next are both things to consider when you offer feedback. So I'll just hit on a few of them, and then you can read through them by pausing the video or anything else you want to do. So if you're looking at a story to give feedback, you want to give that person feedback that is useful to them, that they can use to build their story up better or to make changes that are really useful. So pointing out what stood out to you, whether you really disliked it or you loved it, is useful, and kind of explaining why. Letting them know if their dialogue was purposeful, any places that you got bored, because an author doesn't want you to be bored. So point those out if they just didn't hit with you, and explain why. Was the pacing too slow, too much or not enough description? Did it just kind of veer off randomly and didn't seem that it needed to be there? Those are important things to let them know. And you also want to talk about like the beginnings, the endings. Did the beginning make sense? Was the ending satisfying? If you're reading an excerpt that's like mid-scene or mid-chapter, that may not may not apply in this instance. Is there anywhere that things could be cut, where you needed more information? How did you react to the characters? Do you get a hint of what they're aiming for and who they are in this scene? Okay, and like I said, you can use this link down here. Type that up in your address bar to find this document, or I will link to it in the YouTube description. When you're thinking about writing groups or writing opportunities near you, here are some local options close to Chicago, in and around the city, that you might want to be involved in. And I've got their websites linked here, so you can look into those. The Chicago Writers Association down at the bottom, I've linked to their resource page because they've got a lot of information about agents and editing and revising and different things like that would be useful to you. Not so much as like a group coming together and working on their art, but you can use those resources there. The Young Chicago Authors are really great, especially if you're interested in things like slam poetry, spoken word, rap. They take part in the Louder Than a Bomb competition. For a few of these, especially the Teen Writers and Artists Project and the Young Chicago Authors, their stuff is a little bit up in the air right now since most things are virtual. But go ahead and look into those and see if you'd be interested in getting involved or how you can get involved in those options. All right, so once you've done some editing on your drafts, once you've gotten some feedback from other people, you might be considering options related to publishing. And there are a lot of options related to publishing. So I'm going to talk through a few of those. So first of all, you might want to consider where you can submit. So if your school has a literary magazine or a newspaper, they may take submissions from student writers and artists and allow those in their final product. If you have any creative writing classes, sometimes they put together anthologies of work from students. And this is for both high school and college. When you get to college, you may want to look into those options. Some colleges have some kind of publication to showcase student work, and you don't always have to be a major or minor in that field to submit. So that is a good option to start out there. The New Pages Young Writers Guide offers options for submitting to literary magazines, serial publications, and contests, and this page is specifically built for young authors. So they'll give you contests and submission calls that are specifically for writers your age and that market, so you know that you're not going to be looked over in favor of an older author. Okay. If you're considering publishing your full story as a book, then you will probably need to consider, and I will talk about both, traditional publishing and self-publishing are two options that are really big. Here I have some information from Laura Spade, who is a literary agent with Triada US Literary Agency. And if you are going the traditional publishing route, most people do work with agents. Some people work directly with the publishing houses, but an agent's job is to get you the best deal. So they, if they like your story, they'll sign you on, and then, they help you with editing. They help you finding a publishing house that will fit your work and will do the best job to get you the best marketing deals, the best contract and royalties, so that you're, getting the most out of your story. It's working for you, things like that. She goes into much more depth, but I have copies of her Q&A that she did for another writing group that I led. She talks about how she as an agent decides who to work with, and so she sees a lot of manuscripts. She may think that a lot of them have merit, but she's only going to work with the writers who she, really loves their story. She's fallen in love with it, and she's willing to represent them potentially for their whole writing career. So that's some information there. She'll also talk about kind of do's and don'ts of querying a literary agent. You always want to be respectful because this is the person who is, trying to help you get a good deal. So when you're looking for one, rudeness is a definite turnoff, obviously. But she goes into depth there. She's also got a guide at this link that specifically talks about writing your query letters and information on finding agents. And if you look at these titles up here, these are some books that she has represented as an agent. Okay. And one of the titles, which is on her suggestions about writing query letters and finding agents, is this Guide to Literary Agents. It is updated yearly, and it's basically a list of the publishing houses and literary agencies and their agents, and how you contact them, what they're looking for. Most agents have specific types of stories that they're looking for and taking in. And so before you submit a story to an agent, you want to do some research on what they're looking for so that you can find your best fit. And as she talks about in one of her, one of the pieces that I linked to earlier, she might find a story that she likes, but she doesn't know the best way to represent it. So she might pass it on to another agent she knows who is looking for that specific type of story, and who can better represent that story. But you want to, as best as possible, target your submissions to agents who are looking for the type of story that you've written. And so you can find this Guide to Literary Agents 2020 through the Bellwood Library catalog. We don't have it physically in our location, but if you put it on hold, we can get it from another library. There are past years for this, like 2019 and 2018, that are still in the system. They might do in a pinch, but your best bet is to find the newest updated version because agents who were listed 2 years ago may not be there anymore. Okay. And get some information for you on self-publishing. All right, so I've got a YouTube video link right down here to a video created by self-published author Sarah Noe. And she is the author of Fallen Hero, which you can see here, and Phantom's Mask, which is the second book in the series. She decided to do the slightly non-traditional route and go do self-publishing, which can be very different from traditional publishing in terms of who does the editing, who does the marketing, how things are printed and distributed. So she, again, for one of my other writing groups, she put together a video answering some questions they had about that process. And she talks about the difference in how much percentage of the cost of the book you get to keep as the author, the differences in how she went about finding an editor for her project, and the differences in marketing and things like that. When you are self-publishing, most of that falls on your shoulders. You have to coordinate that, and you have to be an advocate for your book to make sure that it's getting out there, that it's getting seen, that it's being entered into places where it can be in the running for different awards. So like here, this book has won the Literary Titan Book Award. Okay, so if you're interested in that, you can follow this here, and I will also link to it in the YouTube video description. That's about a 15-minute video if you're interested in that about self-publishing. In addition to that video, I've got this self-publishing resource from smarterartist.net. They created their Your Publishing Path package. And so it's got several pages, and it kind of walks you through deciding whether you want to self-publish, but also considering how you would go about doing your own marketing, and also writing blurbs, even if you're trying to do traditional publishing, putting together kind of your elevator pitch to get people interested. So it's got a lot of good information in there, and you can download that document from my SlideShare as well. So again, I will link to that in the YouTube description if that's easier for you than typing this all out. If you look at this page right here, it has you kind of rate what's important to you in terms of creative control, your own business knowledge, your ability to invest, different things like that. So you can decide whether the self-publishing route is right for you. And so if you take a look at that in combination with Sarah's video, you can get a lot of good information that helps you decide if that's an option for you. So hopefully I've shown you today that once you finish writing your story, there's still a lot that you can do. Maybe you want to set it aside and you just want to feel accomplished that you've written a story, and that's fine. If you want to go on to do more in terms of submitting it to publications or going the traditional or self-publishing route with a full book, these are some options, and I hope they're really useful tips and resources to you guys. I've had a great time creating these videos for you and giving you these tips, helping you beat that writer's block and to beef up your stories. This is the final video, so I just want to wish you congratulations on finishing your story, whether you've done it already or you're doing it in the next few days, and wish you luck with whatever you choose to do with it afterwards. Thanks for joining me.